The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains like thunder in an empty sky, silencing the afternoon chatter of Blackwater Gulch. Catherine Evans stood with her wrists bound, her once fine blue dress stained with the dirt of 3 days' travel, and her eyes flashing with a rage that belied her desperate circumstances. The man who'd fired the shot grinned through tobacco-stained teeth, turning to address the gathering crowd of miners, drifters, and townsfolk who had assembled for the spectacle at the edge of town. $500, he shouted, yanking Catherine's arm to display her like prized livestock. 500 for this fine city girl, education enough to teach your children, pretty enough to warm your bed. Catherine bit back the bile rising in her throat. Just 2 weeks ago, she'd been a respected teacher in St. Louis, boarding a stagecoach west to take a position in San Francisco. Now, she was merchandise, captured by bandits who'd attacked her stagecoach, killed the driver, and decided that selling her would bring more profit than merely robbing her. 400, countered a voice from the crowd, belonging to a grizzled miner with hands like leather and eyes that made Catherine's skin crawl. 450, called another. Catherine scanned the faces surrounding her, searching for a hint of decency, of humanity. But these were frontier men, hardened by the brutal realities of the West in 1876, and the few women present looked away, unable or unwilling to help. 500 stands, insisted her captor, a man called Silas who'd proudly informed her he'd sold 3 other women before her. You won't find better value in these territories. A murmur rippled through the crowd as attention shifted to the road leading into town. Catherine followed their gaze, squinting against the setting sun. A lone rider approached, silhouetted against the amber sky. He rode unhurriedly, the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves carrying across the sudden quiet. As he drew closer, Catherine could make out a tall man with broad shoulders atop a powerful chestnut stallion. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she caught a glimpse of a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. A rifle rested across his saddle, and he wore his gun belt with the casual comfort of a man accustomed to its weight. "Well now," drawled Silas, "seems we got ourselves another bidder." The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size. He wrapped his horse's reins around the hitching post and approached the gathering. The crowd parted for him without conscious thought, responding to some unspoken authority that emanated from his purposeful stride. "This auction is illegal," the stranger said, his voice deep and steady. "Let the lady go." Silas laughed, though Catherine noticed his hand drift toward his pistol. "This here's free territory, mister. No law but what we make. You want her, you pay like everybody else." The stranger's gaze shifted to Catherine, and for the first time she saw his eyes clearly, a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. Something passed between them in that brief moment, an understanding, perhaps, or a promise. "My name is Daniel Redmond," he announced, turning back to Silas. "I've been tracking you since you raided that stagecoach near Cottonwood Springs." A tense silence fell over the crowd. Several men began to edge away, recognizing trouble when they saw it. "I don't know what you're talking about," Silas replied, his jovial manner evaporating. "This here's a legitimate sale. Girls got no family, no protectors." Daniel's hand moved with lightning speed, drawing his revolver before Silas could blink. "I'm not here to bid," he said calmly. "I'm here to claim her freedom." Silas and his 2 companions drew their weapons, but Daniel was already firing. His first shot caught Silas in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second disarmed one of Silas's men with a cry of pain. Before the third could fire, a bullet from Daniel's gun found his chest. The crowd scattered in panic, diving for cover as more shots rang out. Catherine dropped to the ground, rolling beneath the nearby wagon for protection. Through the chaos, she watched as Daniel dispatched Silas's remaining companion with deadly precision. Silas, clutching his bleeding shoulder, tried to flee, but Daniel's boot caught him in the back, sending him sprawling into the dirt. In seconds, Daniel had him disarmed and subdued. "Someone fetch the sheriff." Daniel called out, though Catherine had seen no evidence that Blackwater Gulch possessed such a lawman. To her surprise, a portly man wearing a tarnished badge emerged from the saloon across the street. "What in tarnation is happening here?" he demanded, surveying the carnage with bleary eyes. "These men attacked a stagecoach 3 days back," Daniel explained, keeping his gun trained on Silas. "Killed the driver and kidnapped this woman to sell her." The sheriff scratched his beard, looking uncomfortable. "That's so? Well, can't say I'm surprised about Silas here. Been nothing but trouble since he rode in." He signaled to 2 men who'd emerged from the saloon behind him. "Take him to the jail. We'll sort this out proper-like." As Silas was dragged away, cursing and threatening, Daniel holstered his weapon and approached the wagon where Catherine remained sheltered. He crouched down, those blue eyes finding hers in the shadows. "Miss, are you hurt?" Catherine stared at him, still processing everything that had happened. This stranger had just killed 2 men and wounded another, all apparently to rescue her. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Daniel Redmond," he repeated, extending his hand to help her out. "I've been hunting these men since they attacked your stagecoach. I was too late to prevent it, but I followed their trail." She accepted his hand, noticing the calluses that spoke of a life of hard work despite his obvious skill with firearms. As she emerged from beneath the wagon, the remaining onlookers stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Catherine Evans," she offered, finding her voice at last. I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," Daniel replied, using his knife to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "What these men did was unconscionable." The sheriff ambled over, looking Catherine up and down with newfound interest. "Well, Miss Evans, seems you've had quite an ordeal. Got anywhere to stay in town?" Before she could answer, Daniel spoke. "She'll be under my protection until arrangements can be made for her safe passage to her destination." The sheriff raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. "Suit yourself. I'll need statements from both of you come morning." With that, he turned and headed back toward the saloon, seemingly more interested in returning to his whiskey than pursuing justice. Catherine looked around at the unfamiliar town, the bodies being dragged away, and the suspicious faces of the townsfolk. Then she looked at Daniel Redmond, this dangerous, competent stranger who had appeared like an avenging angel when she'd lost all hope. "I was traveling to San Francisco," she explained. "I have a teaching position waiting, but everything I owned was in my trunk on that stagecoach." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "San Francisco's still a long journey from here. First, let's get you somewhere safe for the night. There's a boarding house down the street that's respectable enough." As they walked side by side through the dusty street, Catherine felt the curious stares of the townsfolk. Whispers followed them, but Daniel seemed oblivious or perhaps simply accustomed to such attention. "You're some kind of lawman?" she asked, trying to make sense of her rescuer. "Former Texas Ranger," he confirmed. "Now I track bounties when they're worth pursuing." "And Silas had a bounty." Daniel's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Not enough of one to justify the chase, if I'm being honest." "Then why?" He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "When I found the stagecoach, I buried the driver proper. Found a manifest in his pocket with the passengers' names. One Catherine Evans, traveling alone to San Francisco. Then I found signs of a woman being taken different boot prints, drag marks. I couldn't just ride away. The simple decency of his explanation brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. After days of terror and degradation, this man's matter-of-fact humanity was almost more than she could bear. "Thank you," she whispered again, inadequate as the words felt. Daniel merely nodded and continued walking. At the boarding house, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes took one look at Catherine's disheveled appearance and ushered her inside without questions. Daniel paid for a room and meals, ignoring Catherine's protests that she would find a way to repay him. "Get some rest," he advised. "We'll figure out next steps in the morning." That night, in a small but clean room with a real bed, Catherine wept for the terror she'd endured, for the driver who died, and for the uncertain future ahead. But beneath those tears lay something unexpected, a seed of hope, planted by a blue-eyed former ranger who'd ridden in from the hills to claim her from the clutches of evil men. Morning brought clarity and renewed determination. Catherine rose early, washing away the last traces of her ordeal with the tepid water provided in her room. The boarding house proprietor, Mrs. Holloway, had lent her a simple dress that fit reasonably well, and Catherine felt almost human again as she descended to the dining room. Daniel was already there, nursing a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with the dangerous man she'd witnessed in action the previous day. "Miss Evans," he greeted her, "you look well rested." "Please call me Catherine," she replied, taking the chair he offered. "After what you've done for me, formality seems unnecessary." He nodded, a slight smile softening his features. "Catherine, then, and I'm Daniel." Over a breakfast of biscuits and bacon, they discussed her situation. Catherine's savings, while modest, had been in her trunk along with her clothes and other possessions. "The stagecoach company might offer compensation," Daniel suggested, "but that could take months if it comes at all." Catherine sighed. "The school in San Francisco is expecting me in 3 weeks. I wrote ahead to confirm my arrival." She straightened her shoulders. "Perhaps I could find work here temporarily, earn enough for passage west." Daniel's expression grew troubled. "Blackwater Gulch isn't the sort of place a lady should linger. The mining operations winding down, and the sort of men left behind aren't the respectable kind." "I don't have many options," Catherine pointed out. "Unless—" The idea forming in her mind was audacious, perhaps even improper, but desperate circumstances called for bold solutions. "You mentioned you track bounties," she began carefully. "Are you heading west? Perhaps we could travel together at least part of the way." "I could cook, help with camp duties." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "It's not a journey for the faint-hearted," he warned. "Rough country, rougher company at times." "I think I've proven I can endure hardship," Catherine replied with more confidence than she felt. "And I'd rather face the challenges of the trail with a—" She searched for the right word. "Protector like yourself than remain here alone." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration. "I am heading toward California," he admitted. "Tracking a man named Garrett who robbed a bank in El Paso. Last reports put him somewhere near Sacramento." "Then it's settled," Catherine declared before he could raise further objections. "We'll be traveling companions until our paths must diverge." Daniel shook his head, but she detected the hint of a smile. "You're a determined woman, Catherine Evans." "Necessity breeds determination, Mr. Redmond." The sheriff appeared in the doorway of the dining room, looking marginally more sober than he had the previous evening. "There you are," he said, approaching their table. "Need those statements I mentioned." They followed him to the small jailhouse, where Silas sat nursing his bandaged shoulder in a cell, glaring at them with undisguised hatred. Catherine recounted the stagecoach attack and her subsequent captivity, while Daniel provided what he knew of Silas and his gang's activities. "Got a telegraph from Silver Creek this morning," the sheriff informed them when they'd finished. "Seems these boys are wanted for similar business in 3 territories. There'll be a proper trial once the circuit judge comes through next month." "We won't be here for it," Daniel stated flatly. "Miss Evans needs to reach San Francisco, and I'm continuing on my current assignment." The sheriff shrugged. "Your statements will suffice, especially with 3 dead bodies and a living victim as evidence." He peered at Catherine curiously. "Though most ladies would be eager to see justice done in person." "Justice is already in motion," Catherine replied, refusing to look at Silas. "My presence won't change that." As they left the jailhouse, Daniel surprised her by placing a hand lightly on her elbow, guiding her through a group of rough-looking miners who had gathered on the boardwalk. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he said quietly. "I need to purchase supplies, and you'll need proper traveling clothes. The dress is fine for town, but not for the trail." Catherine nodded, grateful for his practical approach. "I can help with the preparations." They spent the day making ready for the journey. Daniel purchased sturdy riding clothes for Catherine, trousers that scandalized Mrs. Holloway, but would be far more practical for long days in the saddle. He also acquired a gentle mare for Catherine to ride, as well as supplies sufficient for several weeks of travel. Catherine insisted on helping, using her teaching skills to barter an afternoon of lessons for the shopkeeper's children in exchange for a journal and pencils. She wanted to document her journey, both for herself and to share with her future students in San Francisco. That evening, as they sat on the boarding house porch after dinner, Catherine found herself studying her rescuer and soon-to-be traveling companion. In the fading light, Daniel Redmond looked less formidable than he had during the confrontation with Silas. There was a weariness to him, a hint of solitude that resonated with something in her own soul. "Why did you become a bounty hunter?" she asked impulsively. Daniel was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost contemplative. "After the war, I joined the Rangers. Thought I could help bring order to a chaotic land. Did that work for 7 years. He paused, looking out toward the distant hills. "Then my partner was killed tracking a gang we'd been after for months." The Rangers were changing by then anyway, more politics, less justice. So I turned in my badge and decided to work on my own terms. "You prefer solitude," he considered this. "I prefer clarity. Out here, things are simpler. Right and wrong are clearer when you're not answering to men in offices who have never drawn a gun in their lives." Catherine nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. Teaching has its parallels. The farther you get from the cities and their school boards, the more difference you can make in children's lives. It's why I accepted the position in San Francisco, to help build something meaningful on the frontier. Daniel looked at her with new interest. "Most Eastern ladies come west looking for husbands, not to build something." "I'm not most ladies," Catherine replied with a small smile. "My father was a professor who believed women's minds were equal to men's. He educated me alongside my brothers and encouraged my independence." "Your family didn't object to you traveling so far alone." A shadow crossed Catherine's face. "They're gone. Influenza took my parents 3 years ago, and my brothers are scattered, one in Europe with the diplomatic corps, the other in South America seeking his fortune." "I'm sorry," Daniel said simply. "As am I for whatever losses have left that sadness in your eyes," she replied softly. He looked startled, then thoughtful. "Perceptive," he murmured, almost to himself. Then more briskly, "We should turn in. Dawn comes early, and the first day on the trail is always the hardest." True to his word, Daniel knocked on her door well before sunrise. Catherine was ready, dressed in her new riding clothes with her few belongings packed in saddlebags. Mrs. Holloway provided them with breakfast and packed food for their journey, her initial disapproval of Catherine's attire softening into concern for their welfare. "You take care of this young lady, Mr. Redmond," she instructed as they prepared to depart. "These ain't genteel lands you're heading into." "Yes, madam," Daniel agreed with unexpected deference. They rode out of Blackwater Gulch as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern hills. Catherine couldn't help glancing back at the town that had almost been her doom, now receding behind them. Daniel noticed. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "No," Catherine replied honestly. "Just marveling at how quickly life can change. 3 days ago I thought I would die at the hands of those men. Now I'm riding free toward a new future." Daniel nodded. "The West is like that. Fortunes made and lost in a day, lives changed in the blink of an eye." He adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "We'll follow the old Spanish trail for the first 100 miles or so. There's a trading post 3 days' ride from here where we can resupply." The journey quickly settled into a rhythm. They rode from dawn until mid-afternoon, when the heat became too intense for the horses. Then they would make camp, rest during the hottest hours, and sometimes continue for a few more miles in the early evening before making their night camp. Catherine discovered muscles she hadn't known existed as her body adjusted to long hours in the saddle, but she never complained. Daniel proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to care for her horse, how to make and break camp efficiently, and even the basics of tracking and reading the land. On the third evening, as they sat beside their small fire, Catherine rubbing liniment into her sore thighs, she caught Daniel watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked. "You surprise me," he admitted. "Most city folk would be complaining non-stop by now, especially a woman of your background." Catherine laughed softly. "Would complaining make the journey easier?" "No," he conceded with a rare smile. "Then what would be the point?" She set aside the liniment and pulled out her journal. "Besides, I'm learning so much. My students will love hearing about this adventure." Daniel watched as she began to write by the firelight. "You care about them already, these children you haven't met." "Of course. Every child deserves a teacher who believes in their potential." She paused, looking up at him. "Just as every person deserves someone who believes in their worth." Their eyes held across the fire, and something indefinable shifted between them. Daniel was the first to look away, rising to check the horses one last time before they slept. That night, Catherine dreamed of blue eyes watching over her, keeping her safe in a dangerous land. The trading post appeared on the horizon late on the fourth day, a welcome sight after their isolated journey through increasingly arid terrain. It was little more than a collection of rough buildings surrounding a central store, but to Catherine, it represented connection to the wider world. As they approached, Daniel grew visibly more alert, scanning the handful of horses tied outside the main building. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice taking on the hard edge she remembered from their first meeting. "These places attract all sorts." Inside the store, they found a surprisingly well-stocked establishment. The proprietor, a heavy-set man with a magnificent mustache, greeted Daniel like an old acquaintance. "Redmond, thought you might be dead by now." "Not yet, Harrison," Daniel replied, clasping the man's hand. "Need supplies and information." Harrison's eyes darted to Catherine with open curiosity. "And who might this lady be?" "Catherine Evans." She introduced herself before Daniel could speak. "Mr. Redmond is escorting me to San Francisco." The store owner's eyebrows rose, but he made no comment on their arrangement. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Evans. Any friend of Redmond's is welcome here." While Daniel discussed their supply needs and inquired about his quarry, Catherine explored the store. She was examining a shelf of canned goods when a voice spoke close behind her. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" She turned to find a man in dusty trail clothes regarding her with unconcealed interest. His eyes, bloodshot and too bright, told her he'd been drinking despite the early hour. "Excuse me," Catherine said coolly, attempting to step around him. He shifted to block her path. "No need to be in such a hurry, pretty lady. Name's Wheeler. Frank Wheeler. I'd surely appreciate some female company after weeks on the trail." "I'm not available for company, Mr. Wheeler. Please stand aside." Instead of complying, Wheeler reached out to touch her hair. "Come on now. Don't be—" His words cut off abruptly as Daniel materialized beside them, his hand clamping down on Wheeler's wrist with obvious force. "The lady asked you to step aside," Daniel said quietly, but with unmistakable menace. Wheeler's face flushed with anger, but as he took in Daniel's steady gaze and the gun at his hip, caution prevailed. "Didn't realize she was spoken for," he muttered, yanking his arm free. "She speaks for herself," Daniel corrected him, "and she said no." Wheeler slunk away, casting dark glances over his shoulder. Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel's expression remained grim. "We should move on soon. Harrison says there's a small settlement about 20 miles west with a decent inn. We can rest there tonight instead of here." They purchased their supplies quickly after that, loading them onto their horses as Wheeler and two companions watched sullenly from the trading post porch. "Trouble?" Catherine asked quietly as they mounted up. "Probably not," Daniel replied, though his hand rested near his revolver. "Wheeler's the type who talks big but backs down when challenged. Still, I'd rather not test that theory tonight." They rode hard for the next few hours, putting distance between themselves and the trading post. The landscape changed as they traveled, the arid plains giving way to more varied terrain with scattered pine forests and dramatic rock formations. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air took on the charged quality that precedes a storm. "We may not make the settlement before this breaks," Daniel observed, eyeing the sky with concern. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead that trappers use in winter. Might be our best option." Sure enough, the first heavy raindrops began to fall as they approached a small, sturdy cabin nestled among pine trees. They barely managed to get the horses under the lean-to attached to one side before the skies opened in earnest. Inside, the cabin was basic but sound: a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed frame with a straw mattress. Daniel quickly got a fire going while Catherine arranged their supplies. "We're fortunate to have found shelter," she remarked, listening to the rain hammering on the roof. "This storm sounds fierce." Daniel nodded, shaking water from his hat. "Mountain storms can be. They blow in fast and hit hard, but they usually pass quickly too." This one, however, showed no signs of abating as darkness fell. Lightning flashed with increasing frequency, followed by thunder that rattled the cabin's windows. The temperature dropped rapidly, and despite the fire, Catherine found herself shivering. "Here," Daniel said, noticing her discomfort. He pulled a thick woolen blanket from his pack and draped it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed against her neck momentarily, and Catherine felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how intimate the small cabin felt with just the two of them sheltered from the wild elements outside. They shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and biscuits from the trading post, sitting close to the fire. The conversation flowed more easily than it had before, perhaps due to their confinement or the days they'd now spent in each other's company. Daniel spoke of his childhood in Texas, the son of a rancher who'd lost everything in the war. Catherine told him about her teaching experiences in St. Louis and her dreams for the school in San Francisco. "Why didn't you ever marry?" Daniel asked eventually, the question seemingly surprising him as much as it did her. Catherine smiled wryly. "The men who wanted me didn't want a wife with opinions and ambitions. The men who might have appreciated those qualities never seemed to look my way." She studied him across the flickering firelight. "And you, surely there have been women in your life." A shadow crossed his face. "There was someone once, Laura. We were to be married after I completed my first year with the Rangers." He paused, his eyes on the fire rather than Catherine. "She died of fever while I was away on assignment. By the time I returned, she was already buried." "I'm so sorry," Catherine whispered, understanding now the source of some of his solitude. Daniel nodded, acknowledging her sympathy without looking up. "It was a long time ago, almost 10 years now." "Does the pain lessen?" she asked softly. "It changes," he replied after a moment of reflection. "Becomes part of you rather than something that consumes you. You learn to carry it." Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the pines. Inside, something quiet and profound was building between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both known loss and continued forward anyway. When it came time to sleep, Daniel insisted Catherine take the bed while he made do with his bedroll near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, Catherine lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and the occasional shifting of her companion across the room. For the first time since her ordeal began, she felt not just safe but genuinely at peace. Whatever lay ahead on the trail to San Francisco, she was no longer facing it alone. Morning arrived with surprising brightness, the storm having cleared overnight to reveal a washed, clean sky and glistening landscape. They set out early, making good time on trails hardened by the rain rather than turned to mud as Catherine had feared. By mid-afternoon, they reached the settlement Daniel had mentioned, a collection of perhaps 20 buildings that centered around a crossroads. The inn was clean and respectable, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen who seemed delighted to have a female guest. "So few ladies pass through," she explained as she showed Catherine to a small but charming room. "The men, they come for the mines or the timber, but women," she shook her head. "Only the desperate or the very brave. Or those with excellent escorts," Catherine added with a smile, thinking of Daniel. Mrs. Chen's eyes twinkled. "Your husband is most attentive. I notice these things." "Oh, Mr. Redmond isn't," Catherine began, then stopped herself. Perhaps it was simpler to let the assumption stand during their brief stay. "Yes, I'm fortunate." That evening, they dined in the inn's small restaurant, where Mrs. Chen served a surprisingly sophisticated meal that reflected her Chinese heritage alongside Western staples. Catherine savored unfamiliar flavors and watched as Daniel relaxed more than she had yet seen, even accepting a glass of whiskey after their meal. "Harrison at the trading post told me Garrett was spotted near Sacramento just 2 weeks ago," he informed her as they lingered over coffee. "If we maintain our pace, we could reach there in another 15 days or so." Catherine felt an unexpected pang at the reminder that their journey would eventually end. "And San Francisco is just a short distance beyond that," she acknowledged. "It seems our paths align quite well." Daniel nodded, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Fortune seems to favor us." Later, as Catherine prepared for bed in her private room, a luxury after nights on the trail, she found herself wondering about the nature of fortune and fate. What cosmic alignment had brought Daniel Redmond to Blackwater Gulch at precisely the moment she needed saving? And what did it mean that her heart quickened whenever he looked at her way? Sleep came easier in a real bed, but her dreams were confusing, filled with images of Daniel riding away, of her calling after him but making no sound. The next morning brought the first real challenge to their journey. As they prepared to depart, Daniel discovered his horse had developed a worrying lameness in one leg. "Must have strained something in that rough terrain yesterday," he muttered, examining the chestnut's foreleg with gentle hands. "He needs rest, maybe a few days." Catherine's heart sank. "We could stay here until he recovers." Daniel shook his head. "Each day's delay means Garrett gets farther away, and your position in San Francisco won't wait forever." Mrs. Chen, overhearing their predicament, offered a solution. "My nephew leads supply wagon to mining camp 50 miles west. Leaves today. Perhaps you join him, not fast as riding, but steady progress." Daniel considered this. When would he return this way? Not return. Continues to Sacramento when mining business finished. 2 weeks, maybe less. They exchanged glances, silently weighing their options. "It would mean leaving your horse behind," Catherine pointed out. "Harrison would give me fair price when I telegraph him," Daniel acknowledged. "And Mrs. Chen seems trustworthy enough to care for him until Harrison can collect him." By mid-morning, arrangements had been made. Mrs. Chen's nephew, a solemn young man named Liu, welcomed them aboard his heavily laden wagon with minimal conversation but obvious competence. Catherine's mare was tethered behind the wagon, while Daniel's chestnut remained in Mrs. Chen's stable, destined to be collected by Harrison when he made his monthly supply run. The wagon journey proved to be a different experience entirely from their days on horseback. Progress was slower but steady, and the hard wooden seat was a trial for muscles accustomed to a saddle. Yet there were compensations, time to talk more, to watch the changing landscape without the constant vigilance required when riding. Even to read from the small book of poetry Catherine had purchased at the trading post. Liu proved to be excellent company once his initial reserve melted. He had come to America 5 years earlier to work on the railroad, and had saved enough to purchase his wagon and team, establishing a modest shipping business that served remote settlements and mining camps throughout the territory. "America is land of opportunity," he told them as they camped on the 3rd night of their journey. "If work hard and smart can build good life." Daniel nodded, respect evident in his expression. "You've accomplished a lot in a short time." Liu shrugged modestly. "Same as many Chinese people, good at finding way to succeed, even when laws make difficult." Catherine had read about the increasing restrictions being placed on Chinese immigrants, but had never before spoken directly with someone affected by such policies. Liu's matter-of-fact resilience impressed her deeply. Their route took them through increasingly mountainous terrain, the wagon laboring up steep inclines and navigating narrow passes where sheer drops waited on one side. Liu handled his team with masterful skill, but Catherine often found herself holding her breath on the most treacherous stretches. During one particularly tense passage, with the wagon wheels mere inches from a precipitous edge, Daniel's hand found hers and squeezed reassuringly. She returned the pressure gratefully, drawing strength from his calm presence. That night, as Liu slept soundly after their arduous day, Daniel and Catherine sat by their small fire, speaking in low voices. "You handled that cliff road well today," Daniel observed. "Most city folk would have been terrified." "Who says I wasn't?" Catherine replied with a soft laugh. "But fear doesn't help in such situations. My father always said courage isn't the absence of fear but the mastery of it." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." She paused, remembering. He would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty and competence above all else." Daniel looked pleased by this assessment. High praise. After a moment, he added, "I've been thinking about what comes after Sacramento." Catherine's heart quickened. "Oh, Garrett may be difficult to locate, even with good information. It could take time to track him down and bring him in." "Perhaps." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Perhaps I could continue to San Francisco first, ensure you arrive safely at your school." The idea of extending their time together sent a warm current through Catherine's body. "I would welcome your company," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "if it wouldn't inconvenience your work too greatly." "Some things are more important than bounties," Daniel replied, his eyes holding hers across the fire. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, Liu stirred in his sleep, breaking the spell, and they both retreated to their respective bedrolls, though Catherine suspected neither found sleep quickly that night. The mining camp, when they reached it 2 days later, proved to be a rough settlement carved into a mountainside, with muddy streets and canvas-roofed structures outnumbering proper buildings. Liu was greeted enthusiastically by the camp's inhabitants, who had been awaiting supplies for weeks. While Liu conducted his business, Daniel made inquiries about Garrett at the camp's only saloon. Catherine, meanwhile, found herself drawn into conversation with the camp's schoolteacher, an earnest young woman named Miss Miller, who taught the miners' children in a converted storage shed. "It's primitive," Miss Miller admitted, showing Catherine her makeshift classroom, "but the children are eager to learn, and the miners value education more than you might expect." "How many students do you have?" Catherine asked, impressed by the creative ways Miss Miller had arranged her limited resources. 17 at present, ages 5 to 15, more coming as families arrive." She smiled ruefully. "The challenge is keeping them in school when the older boys are tempted by quick money in the mines." Catherine nodded in understanding. "I've faced similar challenges in my previous position. The lure of immediate income often outweighs the less tangible benefits of education in their minds." They exchanged teaching experiences and strategies until Daniel found them, his expression thoughtful. "Garrett was here," he informed Catherine as they walked back toward the center of camp. "Left about 10 days ago, heading southwest. That aligns with his likely route to Sacramento. Good news then, potentially." His brow furrowed, "though there's talk of trouble brewing. Apache activity has increased in the region we'll be traveling through. 3 attacks on wagons in the past month." Catherine felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "Is there an alternative route?" "A longer one, yes. Adds perhaps 5 days to the journey but skirts the areas where most attacks have occurred." They discussed the options with Liu, who confirmed the reports of Apache unrest. "Many angry about broken treaties, new settlers," he explained. "Longer route safer, especially with wagon." The decision made, they departed the following morning, turning southwest on a well-traveled road that followed a river valley before climbing into higher elevation forests. The scenery was breathtaking, towering pines, dramatic rock formations, and occasional meadows brilliant with wildflowers. Their progress was steady but slower on the mountain roads, and they often made camp well before sunset, unwilling to navigate the difficult terrain in failing light. These longer evenings allowed for deeper conversations, and Catherine found herself sharing stories and dreams she had never voiced to another soul. Daniel, too, gradually revealed more of himself, tales of his ranger days, memories of his Texas childhood, even occasional mentions of Laura that suggested the wound of her loss had truly begun to heal. On their 4th night after leaving the mining camp, Camped in a sheltered grove beside a clear mountain stream, Catherine realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Daniel Redmond. The recognition both thrilled and terrified her. Their journey would end eventually. They each had commitments pulling them in potentially different directions. Yet the connection between them had grown into something that felt too significant to abandon. As if sensing her thoughts, Daniel sat beside her on the fallen log she'd claimed as a seat, closer than was strictly proper. "Penny for your thoughts," he offered quietly. Catherine smiled, watching the firelight play across his features. "I was thinking about destinations and journeys," she replied honestly, if incompletely, profound considerations for a camp in the wilderness. "The wilderness encourages profound thinking, I find." She gathered her courage. "Daniel, what happens when we reach Sacramento, in truth?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the fire rather than her face. "In truth, I don't know. My duty says I should pursue Garrett immediately. My heart." He paused, finally looking at her. "My heart suggests other priorities." Catherine's pulse quickened at the implication. "What does your heart suggest, exactly?" Before he could answer, Liu approached from where he'd been tending the horses. "Storm coming," he announced, pointing to clouds gathering on the horizon. "Big one, should reach camp by morning." The moment broken, they turned to practical matters, securing their supplies and reinforcing the canvas cover on the wagon. By the time they finished, the opportunity for intimate conversation had passed, and Catherine retired to her bedroll with both disappointment and anticipation churning in her chest. The storm arrived with dramatic fury shortly after dawn, bringing not just rain but hail that rattled against the wagon cover with alarming force. Travel was impossible, forcing them to remain in camp for the entire day. They huddled in the wagon, playing cards and sharing stories to pass the time while wind and water lashed the world outside. By evening, the storm had passed, but it left behind muddy, treacherous conditions. Liu advised waiting another day before attempting the mountain roads, a decision Daniel and Catherine readily agreed with. The forced delay created an unexpected holiday atmosphere. Daniel went fishing in the stream, which had swollen with rainwater, and returned triumphantly with 4 plump trout. Catherine gathered wild onions and berries she recognized as safe from her botanical studies. Together, they prepared the most elaborate meal of their journey, laughing and working side by side with an ease that felt both novel and perfectly natural. As dusk fell, Liu excused himself to check on a noise he claimed to have heard near the horses, though his knowing smile suggested he was deliberately giving them privacy. Alone by the fire, Catherine felt a nervous anticipation that reminded her of her youth. "Catherine," Daniel began, his voice unusually hesitant, "these past weeks traveling together, they've meant a great deal to me as well," she assured him, her heart racing. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I haven't felt this way since Laura. Didn't think I could feel this way again." The simple honesty of his admission moved her deeply. "I've never felt this way before," she confessed. "Not with anyone." Daniel's eyes darkened with emotion. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned toward her. Catherine met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared hunger. When they finally broke apart, both breathing quickly, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want our journey to end," he murmured. "Perhaps it doesn't have to," Catherine suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps it's just beginning." He kissed her again, more confidently this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Catherine melted against him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his neck, then tangling in his hair. A discreet cough announced Liu's return, and they separated reluctantly, though Daniel kept hold of her hand. Liu pretended not to notice their flushed faces and bright eyes, busying himself with preparations for the night. Later, lying in her bedroll with her lips still tingling from Daniel's kisses, Catherine felt a happiness so complete it was almost frightening in its intensity. Whatever uncertainties the future held, she knew with absolute conviction that meeting Daniel Redmond had irrevocably changed the course of her life. The improved weather allowed them to resume their journey the next day, though the muddy roads made for slow going. Catherine was acutely aware of Daniel beside her on the wagon seat, their shoulders and thighs occasionally touching as the vehicle jolted over rough spots. Each contact sent sparks through her body, a novel and exhilarating sensation. Their relationship had transformed overnight from companionship to something far more intimate. Daniel found reasons to touch her throughout the day, a hand at her waist as she climbed down from the wagon, fingers brushing hers as he passed her a canteen, a stolen kiss when Liu was occupied with his team. Catherine responded with equal enthusiasm, marveling at how natural it felt to express her growing feelings physically as well as emotionally. Liu observed their blossoming romance with bemused approval, occasionally offering snippets of wisdom from his culture. In China, they say good marriage, like good tea, needs proper preparation, right temperature, and patience to develop full flavor. Catherine blushed at the mention of marriage, though the idea had certainly crossed her mind. Daniel merely smiled enigmatically, his eyes meeting hers with warmth that suggested he wasn't averse to the concept. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered valley, Daniel drew Catherine aside for a private conversation while Liu prepared dinner. "There's something I need to tell you," he said seriously, leading her to a fallen log where they could sit together out of earshot. "Something about my past that you should know before." He hesitated, "before we consider a future together." Catherine's stomach tightened with apprehension, but she nodded encouragingly. Daniel took a deep breath. "You know, I was a ranger and now I hunt bounties. What I haven't told you is why I left the Rangers." His eyes fixed on some distant point. "My partner and I were tracking a gang that had been terrorizing settlements along the border. We cornered them in a canyon, but we were outnumbered. During the firefight, I saw the leader taking aim at my partner. I fired, but—" His voice faltered. "I missed. My partner died instantly." Catherine reached for his hand, her heart aching for his pain. "It wasn't your fault. You tried to save him." Daniel shook his head. "The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing, but I couldn't forgive myself. I resigned my commission the next day. Been hunting dangerous men ever since, partly to bring justice, partly as—" He searched for the right words, "as penance, I suppose." "Is that why you're so determined to find this Garrett?" Catherine asked gently. "Partly. He's hurt innocent people, and he'll hurt more if he's not stopped." Daniel finally turned to look at her directly. "But meeting you has changed something in me, made me question whether vengeance and atonement are enough to build a life around." Catherine squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me this. It doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire your sense of honor even more." Relief washed over his face. "I've been carrying that alone for a long time." "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she promised, leaning forward to kiss him softly. The tender moment was interrupted by Liu calling them for dinner, but something fundamental had shifted between them. A new level of trust had been established, a deeper understanding of each other's wounds and strengths. As they continued their journey over the next several days, the landscape gradually changed, descending from the mountains into rolling foothills covered with oak woodlands and chaparral. The weather grew warmer, and signs of civilization became more frequent: occasional farmsteads, better maintained roads, even passing travelers headed in the opposite direction. Liu estimated they were less than a week from Sacramento, news that brought Catherine both excitement and anxiety. Her position in San Francisco awaited, a commitment she had no intention of abandoning, yet the prospect of separating from Daniel, even temporarily, filled her with dread. They had spoken in generalities about the future of Daniel accompanying her to San Francisco after concluding his business with Garrett, of possibilities beyond that, but nothing concrete had been decided. Catherine was reluctant to press for definitive plans, aware that Daniel's sense of duty regarding Garrett's capture ran deep. On their 9th day after leaving the mining camp, they encountered a stagecoach headed east. The driver, a weathered man named Barkley, was eager for news and gossip from the territories they'd traversed. While Liu and Barkley exchanged information about road conditions and local happenings, Daniel inquired about Garrett. Garrett. "Yeah, I know the name," Barkley confirmed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Mean-looking fella with a scar across his jawline. He came through Sacramento about a week back, headed for San Francisco last I heard. Some business opportunity he was pursuing, according to the talk at the station." Daniel's expression darkened. "San Francisco? You're certain? That's the word. Seemed in an almighty hurry too, paid extra for the fastest horse the livery had." After the stagecoach continued on its way, Daniel was uncharacteristically quiet. Catherine waited until they made camp that evening before raising the subject that clearly troubled him. "It's a strange coincidence that Garrett is headed to the same city as us," she observed as they sat by the fire. Daniel nodded grimly. "Too strange for my liking. I'm wondering if it's coincidence at all." Catherine frowned. "You think he knows we're following him? It's possible. Or—" he hesitated. "Or he might know about you." "Me? But how? Why would I matter to him?" Daniel's expression was troubled. "Remember I told you I missed the shot that could have saved my partner. The leader of that gang was Luther Garrett, William Garrett's older brother." Catherine's blood ran cold. "And you think he's seeking revenge? I don't know. But it's been 5 years since I started hunting him, and suddenly he's heading to exactly where you're supposed to be. It makes me uneasy." The implications were frightening. If Garrett knew about Catherine and her connection to Daniel, he might intend to use her as leverage or, worse, as a means of revenge. "What should we do?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Daniel considered this carefully. "Change our plans. Instead of following the main road to Sacramento, we'll take a less traveled route directly to San Francisco. Liu says it's possible, though more difficult for the wagon. And when we arrive, we'll be extremely cautious until I can locate Garrett and determine his intentions." Catherine nodded, trusting his judgment. "Do you think he's dangerous?" "All cornered men are dangerous," Daniel replied soberly. "And if he knows I'm after him, he's definitely cornered." That night, Catherine's dreams were troubled by shadowy figures and pursuits through unfamiliar streets. She woke before dawn, heart racing, to find Daniel already up, checking his weapons by the first gray light. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, moving to sit beside him. He shook his head. "Too many possibilities to consider." He finished loading his revolver and returned it to its holster. "Catherine, if anything happens to me when we reach San Francisco, I want you to go directly to the authorities. Tell them everything." "Nothing is going to happen to you," she insisted, alarmed by his fatalistic tone. Daniel gave her a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope you're right. But Garrett's smart and determined. I underestimated his brother once, and my partner paid the price. I won't make that mistake again." Liu was agreeable to the change in route, though he warned them the roads would be rougher and the journey potentially longer. They set out at first light, turning more directly west on a trail that saw far less traffic than the main thoroughfare to Sacramento. The altered route took them through sparsely populated valleys and dense stands of oak and manzanita. They passed only occasional homesteads, their inhabitants watching the wagon pass with curious expressions, but offering friendly waves when greeted. Despite the beauty of their surroundings, tension rode with them like an unwelcome passenger. Daniel maintained a vigilant watch, his hand never far from his weapon. Catherine found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, her imagination conjuring dangers in every shadow. On their third day on the new route, they encountered their first real difficulty when a wheel broke while navigating a particularly rocky stretch. The wagon lurched dangerously, nearly overturning before Liu managed to bring it to a halt. Examination revealed damage beyond their ability to repair with the tools and materials at hand. The nearest settlement, according to Liu's map, was a small farming community called Oak Ridge, approximately 5 miles ahead. I walked to Oak Ridge, find wagon maker, Liu decided after assessing their options. You stay with wagon, protect supplies. Daniel frowned. I don't like splitting up, especially now. No choice, Liu pointed out practically. Cannot move wagon, cannot leave it unattended with valuable goods. I walk faster alone. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. Liu set off on foot, promising to return with help by the following day if possible. Left alone with the disabled wagon, Daniel and Catherine made camp in a defensible position against a rocky outcrop, with clear views of the surrounding terrain. As evening approached, Daniel grew increasingly restless, constantly scanning their surroundings. Something feels wrong, he admitted when Catherine questioned his unease. Can't put my finger on it, but my instincts are rarely mistaken in these matters. Catherine had learned to trust his instincts. What should we do? Be ready to move quickly if necessary. Keep your voice low and stay close to me. He checked his weapons again, a habit that Catherine had once found disconcerting but now found reassuring. They ate a cold dinner, unwilling to risk a fire that might be visible from a distance. As darkness fell, the normal sounds of the wilderness insects chirping, the occasional call of a night bird seemed unnaturally loud in their heightened state of alertness. Try to get some sleep, Daniel suggested, though his posture remained vigilant. I'll keep watch. Catherine doubted she could sleep under the circumstances but arranged her bedroll near the wagon where Daniel had indicated. She had just closed her eyes when Daniel's hand clamped over her mouth, startling her into full wakefulness. His lips were at her ear, his voice barely audible. Riders approaching, at least 3. Move to the rocks. Now. Heart pounding, Catherine followed him to the outcropping, where they concealed themselves among the boulders. Minutes later, 3 mounted figures emerged from the darkness, approaching the wagon with obvious caution. Looks abandoned, one of them commented, dismounting to investigate further. Spread out, ordered another, his voice carrying authority. They can't have gone far with night falling. From their hiding place, Daniel drew his revolver, motioning for Catherine to stay absolutely still. She could barely make out his expression in the darkness, but his body was tense with readiness. The men searched the wagon, then began examining the ground around it, looking for tracks. They were methodical and professional in their movements, not random bandits, Catherine realized with growing dread, but men with a purpose. When one of the searchers began moving toward their hiding place, Daniel made a swift decision. Pulling Catherine deeper into the rocks, he whispered urgently, "When I engage them, run west through the oak grove. Keep going until you reach Oak Ridge. Find Liu." "I won't leave you," she protested. "You must." Garrett wants you to get to me. I won't let him use you that way." He pressed something into her hand, a small Derringer pistol. "Use this only if you have no choice." Before she could argue further, Daniel squeezed her hand once, then moved silently around the edge of the outcrop. Seconds later, a shot rang out, followed by a cry of pain and sudden chaos as the other two men scrambled for cover. "Go!" Daniel shouted, firing again to provide her cover. With tears blurring her vision, Catherine ran as directed, plunging into the darkness of the oak grove. Behind her, gunfire continued, the sharp reports echoing through the night. She ran blindly, branches whipping at her face, the small pistol clutched in her hand. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the sounds of conflict faded behind her. Catherine slowed, trying to orient herself in the darkness. "West," Daniel had said. But which way was west in the confusing tangle of trees? She paused, remembering her father's lessons about navigation. The North Star would guide her. Looking up through gaps in the canopy, she located Polaris and oriented herself accordingly. West would be to her left. Moving more deliberately now, she continued through the woodland. Her mind raced with worry for Daniel. Had he escaped? Was he injured? Captured? The uncertainty was agonizing, but she forced herself to focus on reaching Oak Ridge. Finding Liu and bringing help was her best chance of aiding Daniel. Dawn was breaking when Catherine finally stumbled onto a dirt road. Exhausted and disoriented, she followed it, praying it led to Oak Ridge. An hour later, her prayers were answered as the first buildings of a small settlement appeared ahead. The town was just waking up, a few early risers tending to morning chores. Catherine approached the first person she saw, an elderly man feeding chickens outside a modest farmhouse. "Please," she began, her voice hoarse from thirst and emotion, "I need help. My companion, Liu Wang, he came here yesterday about a broken wagon." The man studied her disheveled appearance with concern. "The Chinaman?" "Yes, he's at the smithy with Caleb Jenkins, arranging for wheel repairs." He pointed down the street, building with the smoke coming out the chimney. Catherine thanked him and hurried to the smithy, where she found Liu deep in conversation with a burly man she presumed to be Caleb Jenkins. Both looked up in surprise at her sudden entrance. "Miss Evans!" Liu exclaimed. "What happened? Where is Mr. Redmond?" Through tears, Catherine explained the night's events. As she spoke, Caleb Jenkins's expression grew increasingly grave. "Sounds like trouble of a serious nature," he observed when she had finished. "Oak Ridge doesn't have a proper sheriff, but we've got a militia of sorts for protection. I'll round up some men." "We must hurry," Liu insisted. "If Mr. Redmond's still alive, he needs help now." Catherine shuddered at the "if," refusing to consider the alternative. "I can lead you back to the wagon," she offered, though her body protested the idea of more exertion. "You've done enough, miss," Caleb assured her. "My son knows those woods better than most. He'll guide us. You should rest and recover your strength." Despite her protests, Catherine was eventually persuaded to remain behind with the blacksmith's wife, a kind-faced woman named Martha who provided food, clean water, and a place to wash away the dirt of her ordeal. "Your man's a fighter from the sound of it," Martha said encouragingly as she tended the scratches on Catherine's face and arms. "If anyone can hold their own against such odds, it sounds like he can." Catherine nodded, clinging to this hope as the hours crawled by with no news from the search party. By mid-afternoon, her nerves were stretched to breaking point. She had just decided to set out on her own when hoofbeats announced the party's return. She rushed outside, scanning the riders desperately for Daniel's familiar figure. Her heart sank when she didn't immediately see him, then soared as the group parted to reveal Daniel riding double with one of the men, his left arm bound in a makeshift sling. Catherine ran to him as he dismounted awkwardly, throwing her arms around his waist with such force that he winced despite his smile. "Careful," he murmured, his good arm encircling her. "I'm a bit worse for wear." "You're alive," she whispered against his chest. "That's all that matters." Later, after Daniel's wounds had been properly cleaned and bandaged, a bullet grazed to his shoulder and a knife cut on his forearm. Painful but not life-threatening, they sat together in the small room Martha had provided for them at the back of the smithy. "I managed to wound 2 of them before they flanked me," Daniel explained. "Thought that might be the end, but they wanted me alive. Said Garrett was looking forward to a reunion." His expression darkened. "I created an opportunity and got away, but they'll be looking. They know we're headed to San Francisco." Catherine gripped his hand tightly. "What do we do now?" Daniel's eyes were resolute. "Change the game. Instead of running from Garrett, I'm going to find him first. End this once and for all." "How? We don't even know where in San Francisco he is." "Not yet. But I have contacts, their former rangers, law enforcement. With their help, we'll locate him before he realizes I've survived this ambush." Caleb Jenkins entered with news that the wagon wheel would be repaired by morning. "My boys and I will escort you to the edge of our territory," he offered. "Can't spare men beyond that, but it should give you a head start." Daniel thanked him sincerely. "Your community has shown exceptional kindness to strangers. We won't forget it." That night, despite her exhaustion, Catherine lay awake beside Daniel on their separate pallets, listening to his steady breathing and thanking Providence for his survival. Whatever dangers lay ahead in San Francisco, they would face them together. The thought brought both terror and a strange exhilaration. In just weeks, her life had transformed from the predictable path of a schoolteacher to an adventure she could never have imagined. "Daniel," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. "When this is over, when Garrett is captured, and I've started my position at the school, what happens to us?" There was a pause, then rustling as Daniel shifted to face her in the darkness. "What do you want to happen, Catherine?" Her heart pounded as she considered her answer. "I want us to have a future together. I know my teaching is important to me and your work is important to you, but I believe we could find a way to make both possible." Daniel's hand found hers across the space between their pallets. "I've been thinking the same. San Francisco has need of lawmen with experience. Perhaps I could find a position there, something more settled than bounty hunting, but still putting my skills to use." The idea of Daniel remaining permanently in San Francisco sent a wave of joy through Catherine. "You'd consider that?" "Giving up the trail for a city position? For the right reasons, yes." His voice softened. "You're the right reason, Catherine. I've lived too long with ghosts and regrets. You've reminded me there's more to life, more to me than atonement for past failures." Catherine squeezed his hand, too moved for words. After a moment, Daniel continued, his tone shifting to something more formal. "I know this isn't the proper way, without asking your father's permission or having a ring, but—" He paused, and she heard him take a deep breath. "Catherine Evans, when this business with Garrett is concluded, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Catherine's eyes, happiness overwhelming her caution. "Yes," she whispered fervently. "Yes, Daniel Redmond, I will marry you." He raised her hand to his lips in the darkness, kissing it tenderly. "Then I have even more reason to see this through safely." With renewed hope for their future, they finally drifted to sleep, hands still clasped between them. Morning brought renewed determination. The wagon wheel had been expertly repaired, and Liu was eager to continue their journey. As promised, Caleb Jenkins and 4 other men from Oak Ridge accompanied them for the first 10 miles, ensuring no pursuit followed from the direction of their previous camp. When the escort turned back, Daniel set a grueling pace, pushing westward with minimal stops. Liu, understanding the urgency, drove his team harder than usual, coaxing impressive speed from the sturdy horses. The landscape continued to change as they progressed, the rolling hills giving way to more fertile valleys where farms and orchards increasingly replaced wilderness. Signs of civilization became more frequent, well-maintained roads, passing travelers, even small villages where they could resupply. Throughout the journey, Daniel maintained vigilant watch, his injured arm notwithstanding. He insisted they avoid main thoroughfares and larger settlements where word of their passing might travel to Garrett's ears. Catherine noticed that he slept little, often remaining on guard while she and Liu rested. Despite the tension, there were moments of tenderness between them. Brief touches, shared glances, whispered conversations about their future plans. These sustained Catherine through the uncertainty and fear that shadowed their progress. 5 days after leaving Oakridge, they crested a hill and saw, in the distance, the glittering waters of San Francisco Bay. The city itself spread along the shore, a bustling metropolis that represented both opportunity and danger. "We'll approach from the south," Daniel decided after consulting with Liu. "Less traffic that way, and we can enter the city with less notice." Their plan was to find lodging in a quieter district, while Daniel contacted his associates. Catherine would delay reporting to the school until they had located Garrett and neutralized the threat he posed. As they descended toward the city, Catherine felt a complex mixture of emotions: excitement about reaching her destination at last, fear about the confrontation that awaited them, and a deep, abiding love for the man who had saved her in more ways than one. "It's beautiful," she observed as the late afternoon sun gilded the buildings and ships in the harbor. "It is," Daniel agreed, his expression softening briefly before returning to its vigilant mask. "A place where a person might build a good life with the right companion." Catherine's heart warmed at the implication. Despite everything, their future together still beckoned, tantalizingly close yet contingent on the dangerous task that lay before them. They reached the outskirts of San Francisco as dusk was falling, the city's lamps being lit one by one along the streets. Liu knew of a modest inn in a predominantly Chinese neighborhood where questions weren't asked and privacy was respected. The Lotus House proved to be clean and unassuming, its proprietress, Mrs. Lin, a dignified woman who accepted Liu's introduction of Daniel and Catherine as friends deserving special consideration. She provided them with adjacent rooms at the back of the establishment, accessible through a separate entrance if desired. "Very quiet here," she assured them in accented English. "Good for rest after long journey." That evening, after a simple but delicious meal in the inn's small dining room, Daniel outlined his plan. "I'll contact James Forrester tomorrow morning. He's a former ranger who now works for the city police. If anyone can help us locate Garrett without alerting him, it's James." Catherine nodded, trusting his judgment. "And I should write to the school, explaining that my arrival will be delayed by a few days due to travel complications." "A wise precaution," Daniel agreed. "We don't want them sending someone to investigate your absence, potentially leading Garrett to your whereabouts." They retired to their separate rooms as propriety demanded, though Daniel insisted on checking Catherine's room thoroughly before bidding her good night with a lingering kiss. "Lock your door," he instructed. "And remember, I'm just next door if you need anything." Sleep came fitfully to Catherine that night, her dreams troubled by faceless pursuers and desperate escapes. She woke to early morning fog shrouding the city, muting sounds and casting an ethereal quality over the unfamiliar surroundings. After breakfast, Daniel departed to seek out his contact, while Catherine composed her letter to the school board. Liu offered to deliver it, having business of his own in the commercial district near where the school was located. Left alone at the inn, Catherine found herself at loose ends, nervous energy making it impossible to remain idle. Mrs. Lin, noticing her restlessness, invited her to help prepare dumplings for the evening meal, a task that proved both distracting and educational, as the older woman shared techniques and stories with equal generosity. "You love him very much," Mrs. Lin observed astutely as they worked side by side. The tall American with sad eyes, Catherine blushed but didn't deny it. "Is it so obvious? To woman who has lived long life, yes." Mrs. Lin smiled knowingly. "He loves you also, watches you when you're not looking, very protective." "We hope to marry," Catherine admitted, "once certain matters are resolved." Mrs. Lin nodded approvingly. "Good match. Strong man with kind heart, strong woman with brave spirit, make strong family together." The simple validation warmed Catherine deeply. After her ordeal and the whirlwind romance that had followed, hearing an outsider affirm the rightness of their match was reassuring. Daniel returned in the late afternoon, his expression cautiously optimistic. "James is helping," he reported once they were alone in Catherine's room. "He's had men making discreet inquiries throughout the day. Garrett was seen 3 days ago at the Golden Palace, a high-end gambling establishment near the waterfront. He's made no secret of his presence in the city, which suggests he's confident in his position." "Did your friend learn what business Garrett is pursuing here?" Catherine asked. Daniel nodded grimly. "According to local gossip, he's partnered with a shipping magnate named Harrison. They're expanding into less legitimate ventures, smuggling, protection rackets. Garrett provides the muscle, Harrison the respectability and connections. So he's establishing himself here permanently. It appears so, which explains why he wants to eliminate me. I represent a threat to his fresh start." Daniel paced the small room, thinking aloud. "James suggests we let Garrett come to us, but on our terms. Set a trap rather than hunt him directly." The idea of using themselves as bait made Catherine's stomach clench with anxiety, but she recognized the strategic advantage. How would it work? "James would arrange for word to reach Garrett that I survived the ambush and have arrived in San Francisco, seeking treatment for injuries. He'd suggest I'm vulnerable, staying at a specific location to recover. While actually you'd be waiting in ambush," Catherine deduced. "Exactly." "James would have officers positioned discreetly to assist when Garrett makes his move." Daniel stopped pacing, facing her directly. "The risk is that he might not come personally, might send his men instead." "Then we'd still be in danger and he'd remain free," Catherine concluded, understanding the dilemma. Daniel nodded. "It's a calculated risk. James believes Garrett's pride will demand personal involvement, especially given the connection to his brother. But we can't be certain." They discussed alternatives late into the evening, but ultimately concluded that the trap offered their best chance of resolving the situation quickly and definitively. The following day, preparations were made. James Forrester, a weathered man with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner, visited them at the Lotus House to coordinate details. He brought civilian clothes for Daniel to replace his distinctive trail garb, making him less recognizable during their next phase. "We've secured a small house on Russian Hill," James explained, spreading a map of the city on the table. "Respectable neighborhood, but with enough privacy to suit our purposes. The story will be that you're recuperating there from wounds sustained during your escape from Garrett's men." Catherine would remain at the Lotus House under Liu and Mrs. Lin's protection until Garrett was apprehended. Though she protested this separation vigorously, Both Daniel and James were adamant. "Garrett knows your face now," Daniel reminded her. "If he or his men spot you, they'll know something's amiss. The plan depends on him believing I'm alone and vulnerable." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed to the arrangement, though the thought of Daniel facing such danger without her nearby filled her with dread. That night, their last together before implementing the plan, they sat on the small balcony outside Catherine's room, watching the fog roll in from the bay. Daniel held her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I want to do things properly. Court you as you deserve, not rushed by danger and necessity." Catherine smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I don't need courting, Daniel. I already know my heart." "Nevertheless," he insisted, "some things shouldn't be hurried. Building a life together should be savored, not hastily arranged in the midst of crisis." She looked up at him, touched by his desire to honor her with traditional courtship, despite the unconventional circumstances of their relationship. "Very well, Mr. Redmond. I shall expect proper calls and chaperoned outings once Garrett is safely behind bars." He chuckled, the sound vibrating pleasantly against her cheek. "And flowers. I'm told ladies appreciate flowers." "Indeed they do," she agreed, playing along. "And poetry. A gentleman should always have appropriate verses at the ready to impress his intended." Daniel winced comically. "I may falter there. My education didn't extend to the finer points of poetic expression." "Then I shall have to teach you," Catherine declared, her heart light despite the dangers that awaited them. "A fair exchange, as you've taught me so much about survival and courage." They remained on the balcony until the night air grew too chill to ignore, talking of small, normal things, preferences for morning or evening, favorite foods, childhood memories. It was as if, by discussing the ordinary aspects of life, they could conjure the peaceful future they both craved. When Daniel finally rose to return to his own room, he pulled Catherine into a lingering embrace. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever happens tomorrow or the days after, know that you've brought light back into my life when I thought it was lost forever." "I love you too," she whispered, holding him tightly. "Come back to me safely. That's all I ask." He kissed her then tenderly at first, then with increasing passion that spoke of all they hoped to share in the years ahead. When they finally parted, both were breathless and flushed. "Good night, my love," Daniel said, reluctantly stepping toward his door. "Dream of better days to come." Catherine watched him go, sending up a silent prayer for his safety and the swift resolution of the danger that threatened their happiness. Dawn brought fog so thick that buildings across the street were barely visible, a ghostly shroud that seemed fitting for the day's clandestine activities. Daniel departed early with James, leaving Catherine with a brief kiss and a promise to send word as soon as Garrett was apprehended. The hours that followed were among the most difficult of Catherine's life. She alternated between pacing her room and helping Mrs. Lynn with various tasks, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from dwelling on worst-case scenarios. Liu, sensing her distress, offered quiet companionship and reassurance. "Mr. Redmond, very capable man," he reminded her, "and has good friends helping him. Will succeed, I think." Catherine nodded gratefully. "You've become a dear friend to us both, Liu. I don't know how we would have managed this journey without you." The Chinese man smiled, pleased by her words. "America, land of opportunity, yes, but also land of friendship sometimes. Good people find each other, help each other, is way world should work." Midday came and went with no word. As afternoon waned into evening, Catherine's anxiety increased exponentially. James had promised to send a messenger once the trap was sprung, regardless of the outcome. The continuing silence suggested either delay or complications. She was picking at a dinner she had no appetite for when Mrs. Lynn approached with an envelope. "Messenger, bring this," she explained. "Say very important." Catherine tore it open with trembling fingers, recognizing neither the handwriting nor the name signed at the bottom. "Dear Miss Evans, circumstances have changed. Mr. Redmond requests your immediate presence at the address below. A carriage has been arranged and awaits you outside. Bring only what you can carry easily. With respect, Thomas Whitley, associate of J. Forrester." Alarm bells rang in Catherine's mind. The note was suspicious in multiple ways. Daniel would never summon her to the trap location, nor would James allow it. And why would an associate she'd never heard of be the messenger? Is messenger still here? She asked Mrs. Lynn urgently. "No, leave right away." "Say carriage waiting for you at corner." Catherine made a swift decision. "Please ask Liu to come to my room immediately, and if anyone else asks for me, tell them I'm indisposed and cannot be disturbed." When Liu arrived moments later, she showed him the note and explained her suspicions. "I believe it's from Garrett or his men. They're trying to lure me out." Liu's expression grew serious. "Very dangerous. Should stay here, send message to Mr. Forrester." "That would take too long. If Garrett is trying to get to me, something must have gone wrong with the plan." Catherine paced the room, thinking rapidly. "I need to warn Daniel, but I can't risk leading Garrett's men directly to him if they follow me." After brief discussion, they devised a strategy. Liu would exit the inn and appear to be Catherine from a distance, wearing her cloak and hat. He would lead any watchers on a circuitous route through the city, while Catherine, disguised in some of Liu's spare clothes, would make her way directly to the Russian Hill address. James had shown them on the map. The plan was risky, but Catherine was determined. If Daniel was in danger, every moment counted. Disguised with her hair tucked under a cap and Liu's jacket concealing her figure, Catherine slipped out the service entrance of the Lotus House. The fog, while beginning to thin, still provided valuable cover as she navigated unfamiliar streets, consulting the small map Liu had quickly sketched for her. San Francisco at night was both magnificent and intimidating, gaslights glowing in the mist, the sounds of music and laughter spilling from establishments both respectable and otherwise, occasional figures moving purposefully or drunkenly along the wooden sidewalks. Catherine kept to shadows where possible, avoiding direct contact with other pedestrians. The hill grew steeper as she progressed, her legs protesting the climb after a day of enforced inactivity. Finally, she located the address, a modest but well-maintained house set slightly apart from its neighbors, with a small garden in front. No lights showed from the windows, which immediately struck Catherine as wrong. If Daniel was using the house as a trap, there should be some indication of occupancy to lure Garrett in. Approaching cautiously, she circled to the rear of the property, finding a back door that yielded to her gentle push. Inside, the house was dark and silent, showing signs of recent but hasty abandonment. A coffee cup half full on a table, a chair overturned, a man's hat discarded on the floor. Heart pounding, Catherine moved through the rooms, straining her eyes in the darkness. In what appeared to be a study, she found evidence of struggle, papers scattered, a bookcase partially collapsed, and most alarmingly, dark stains on the wooden floor that she feared might be blood. "Daniel," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. A floorboard creaked behind her. Before she could turn, a hand clamped over her mouth while another pinned her arms to her sides. "Well, well," a voice murmured in her ear. "The schoolteacher comes looking for her hero. How predictable." Catherine struggled against the iron grip, but her captor was far stronger. When the hand moved slightly from her mouth, she managed one desperate cry for help before a cloth replaced it, carrying a sickly sweet chemical smell that made her head swim alarmingly. Her last conscious thought was of Daniel, and whether she would ever see him again. Catherine awoke to the gentle rocking motion of a boat and the sound of water lapping against wood. Her head throbbed painfully, and her mouth felt dry as cotton. As awareness returned, she realized her hands were bound behind her, and she was lying on what felt like a hard wooden bench. Opening her eyes cautiously, she found herself in the cabin of a small vessel not much more than a fishing boat, from what she could see. A lantern swung from a hook in the ceiling, casting shifting shadows across the cramped space. Across from her, a man sat watching, a revolver resting casually on his knee. He was perhaps 40, with a lean, weathered face and cold eyes. The scar along his jawline identified him unmistakably as William Garrett. "Awake at last," he observed, his voice the same one she'd heard before losing consciousness. "I was beginning to worry I'd used too much chloroform." Catherine tried to speak, found her throat too dry and swallowed painfully before trying again. "Where is Daniel?" Garrett smiled without warmth. "Persistent, aren't you? Redmond is exactly where I want him, following a trail I've laid, thinking he's rescuing you. He'll know it's a trap," Catherine managed, struggling to a sitting position despite her bonds, counting on it. Garrett leaned forward, studying her with detached interest. "He'll come anyway. That's the beauty of using you as bait. His sense of honor won't allow him to abandon you, even knowing he's walking into danger." The boat lurched suddenly as a wave struck it broadside. Through a small porthole, Catherine could see they were moving across open water, the bay, she presumed, though to what destination she couldn't guess. "What do you want from him?" she asked, playing for time and information. Garrett's expression hardened. "Justice. Redmond killed my brother. Shot him down like a dog while he was trying to surrender." Catherine knew this was a lie. Daniel had told her the full story of that fateful confrontation. How Luther Garrett had continued firing even as his men threw down their weapons. How Daniel's partner had died trying to accept what appeared to be surrender. "That's not what happened," she said firmly. "You weren't there," Garrett snapped. "I heard it from men who were. Luther was laying down his gun when Redmond shot him. Cold-blooded murder justified by a ranger's badge." He spat the last words with visceral hatred. Catherine realized arguing would be pointless. William Garrett had built his revenge around a version of events that absolved his brother of wrongdoing and cast Daniel as the villain. No evidence would sway him from this narrative. "And now you'll murder Daniel to avenge your brother's death," she stated flatly. "How does that make you any different from what you believe him to be?" Garrett laughed humorlessly. "Oh, I'm not planning to just kill him, schoolteacher. That would be too quick, too merciful. No, I want him to suffer first, to lose what matters most, just as I did." His gaze slid over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're part of that suffering." Fear clutched at Catherine's heart, but she fought to maintain a calm exterior. Daniel was coming, of that she had no doubt. Her job was to stay alive until he arrived, and if possible, to create opportunities rather than obstacles for her rescue. The boat's engine changed pitch, slowing as they approached what appeared to be a small island or perhaps a peninsula jutting into the bay. A rickety dock came into view, alongside a dilapidated structure that might once have been a cannery or processing plant. "Home, sweet home," Garrett announced with mocking ceremony. "At least for the brief remainder of your stay in San Francisco." When the boat bumped against the dock, Garrett hauled Catherine to her feet and pushed her toward the cabin door, where another man waited to help her disembark. This second captor was younger, with a bandaged arm that Catherine recognized one of the men who had attacked their camp days earlier. "Careful with her, Morris," Garrett instructed as they maneuvered her onto the dock. "She's no good to us damaged. Not yet, anyway." The abandoned cannery was even more forbidding up close a cavernous space with rusting machinery, broken windows that let in the cool night air, and the lingering smell of long-gone fish. Garrett led her to a small office area that had been converted into a makeshift living quarters, with cots, a table, and a pot-bellied stove providing minimal warmth. 2 more men lounged there, playing cards. They looked up with interest as Catherine was brought in. "Redmond's woman?" one asked, eyeing her speculatively. Garrett nodded. "The bait for our trap. Jenkins delivered the note as planned, straight to the Chinaman's place," the man confirmed. "Saw a woman leave with a Chinaman not long after, heading west. Didn't follow, figured you'd want us here instead." "Good." Garrett pushed Catherine into a chair, finally cutting the bonds on her wrists, but immediately securing her ankle to the chair leg with a length of chain. "Redmond will figure out where we've gone soon enough. I left plenty of breadcrumbs for a tracker of his caliber." Catherine rubbed her chafed wrists, mind racing as she assessed her situation. 4 men that she could see, all armed. A remote location accessible primarily by water, and Daniel walking knowingly into an ambush because of her. "What makes you think he's coming alone?" she challenged. "He has friends in the city police. They could be surrounding this place even now." Garrett seemed untroubled by the suggestion. "Possibly, but Forrester's men are stretched thin tonight dealing with a series of mysterious fires in the commercial district." He smirked. Amazing how helpful a few strategic diversions can be. The calculated nature of his plan chilled Catherine. Garrett had orchestrated everything meticulously, from luring her out of the Lotus house to ensuring the police would be occupied elsewhere when Daniel came for her. Hours passed in tense waiting. Catherine was given water but no food, though she doubted she could have eaten anyway. Her captors largely ignored her, continuing their card game and occasionally stepping outside to patrol the perimeter of the building. Sometime after midnight, by Catherine's estimation, a signal came 3 short whistles from the darkness outside. Garrett immediately ordered the lamps turned down, leaving only a single dim light in the office area where Catherine was held. "Places, gentlemen," he instructed, checking his revolver. "Our guest of honor is arriving." 2 men moved into the shadows of the main factory floor while Morris remained with Garrett in the office, standing behind Catherine with his gun drawn. Minutes crawled by in silence so complete that Catherine could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then, almost imperceptibly, a floorboard creaked somewhere in the darkness of the cannery. "Welcome, Redmond," Garrett called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I've been expecting you. Your lady friend and I have been having quite the conversation while we waited." No response came from the darkness. Garrett nodded to Morris, who grabbed Catherine's hair and yanked her head back, pressing his gun barrel to her temple. She gasped involuntarily at the pain. "I know you're out there, Redmond," Garrett continued. "Show yourself, or Morris gets trigger-happy with the schoolteacher." A long moment passed before Daniel's voice emerged from the shadows, calm and steady despite the circumstances. "Let her go, Garrett. This is between you and me." "Indeed it is," Garrett agreed, "but she makes such useful leverage. Step into the light where I can see you. Hands empty." Another pause, then Daniel appeared at the edge of the illuminated area, his hands raised shoulder high to show they held no weapons. His face was bruised, with a cut above one eye suggesting he hadn't come to this confrontation without a previous struggle. His eyes found Catherine's immediately, a world of emotion passing between them in that brief connection. "Are you hurt?" he asked her quietly. No, she managed, though Morris yanked her hair again in warning. Garrett studied Daniel with the intensity of a predator sizing up long-awaited prey. 5 years I've waited for this moment, he said, almost conversationally. 5 years planning how to make you pay for Luther's death. Luther died because he chose to fight rather than surrender honestly, Daniel replied evenly. He killed my partner with his last shot. Whatever you've heard otherwise is a lie. Garrett's face contorted with rage. The only liar here is you. My brother was a better man than you'll ever be. Your brother was a murderer and a thief, Daniel countered, his gaze never wavering. Just like you've become. With a roar of fury, Garrett lunged forward, striking Daniel across the face with his revolver. Daniel staggered but didn't fall, straightening to face his attacker with blood now trickling from a fresh cut on his cheekbone. "Is this how you want it, Garrett?" he asked, still maintaining that preternatural calm. "Beating an unarmed man while your thugs hold a gun to a woman's head. Is that the justice you claim to seek?" Something in Daniel's tone gave Garrett pause. He stepped back, regaining his composure with visible effort. "No," he admitted, "that's not how I planned it." He gestured to Morris. "Bring her. We're taking this outside." Morris unchained Catherine from the chair, but kept a bruising grip on her arm as he forced her to her feet. Daniel watched with barely controlled anger as she was manhandled past him, toward the cannery's main entrance. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a night sky scattered with stars and a 3/4 moon that silvered the calm waters of the bay. The abandoned cannery stood on a rocky promontory, with steep drops to the water on 3 sides. The fourth connected to a narrow causeway that was currently underwater with the high tide, effectively making the location an island until morning. Garrett directed them to an open area near the cliff edge, where the moonlight provided clear illumination. "Much better," he declared, surveying the setting with satisfaction. "A fitting place for retribution." "Let Catherine go," Daniel urged again. "She has no part in this." "She became part of it the moment you involved her in your life," Garrett replied coldly. He turned to Morris. "Secure her over there." He pointed to a rusting metal pole that might once have supported equipment, now standing like a lonely sentinel near the cliff edge. Morris dragged Catherine to the pole and bound her to it with rope, tying knots that bit painfully into her wrists. When he finished, he rejoined the other men who had emerged from the cannery to form a loose semicircle, blocking any path of escape. Garrett drew a second revolver from his belt and tossed it at Daniel's feet. "Pick it up." Daniel looked at the weapon, then back at Garrett with suspicion. "What game are you playing?" "A fair one, surprisingly. That gun is loaded, 5 bullets, same as mine." Garrett raised his own revolver. "We'll settle this like men, Redmond, like my brother should have had the chance to do." Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. "A duel." "Exactly." "We fire at my count. Winner walks away. Loser joins the fishes." Garrett's smile was chilling in the moonlight. "Of course, if you refuse, Morris will simply shoot the woman and then we'll kill you anyway. So really, this is the better option all around." Daniel slowly bent to retrieve the revolver, checking it quickly to confirm it was indeed loaded. "And if I win, Catherine goes free. Your men won't harm her." "You have my word," Garrett agreed. Though the promise held little weight coming from such a man, Daniel's eyes sought Catherine's again. In that glance, she read his intention, his apology, and his love. She struggled against her bonds, desperate to intervene to stop this madness, but the ropes held fast. 20 paces, Garrett instructed, positioning himself with his back to Daniel. "Then I count to 3, we turn and fire." "Understood," Daniel nodded grimly, taking his position back to back with his enemy. "Begin," Garrett commanded, and both men started walking in opposite directions, counting steps as they went. Catherine watched in helpless horror, tears streaming down her face. This couldn't be happening, not when they had come so far, faced so much together. Not when their future had seemed so tantalizingly within reach. As the men reached their 20th paces and stopped, Catherine closed her eyes, unable to bear what would come next. She heard Garrett begin his count. 1. A prayer formed on her lips, a desperate plea to whatever powers might be listening. 2. The sound of a gunshot cracked through the night air, followed immediately by another, but they came not from the duelists but from the direction of the causeway. Catherine's eyes flew open to see both Garrett and Daniel diving for cover as more shots rang out. "Police! Drop your weapons!" came a shout from the darkness. Chaos erupted. Garrett's men scattered, returning fire as they sought protection behind equipment and debris. Through the confusion, Catherine saw James Forrester leading a group of officers across the now exposed causeway, the receding tide having opened the path to the mainland. Daniel was moving too, rolling behind a pile of metal barrels as bullets struck sparks from the ground near him. From her exposed position, Catherine could see everything but could do nothing to help or protect herself. Garrett, recovering from his initial surprise, spotted Daniel's vulnerable position and raised his revolver. "This ends now, Redmond," he shouted, firing repeatedly. Daniel returned fire, but Catherine could see he was pinned down, with limited cover and ammunition. The distance between them, perhaps 30 yards, felt like miles as she strained against her bonds, the rope cutting into her wrists until they bled. The gun battle continued around them, policemen advancing methodically across the open ground while Garrett's remaining men offered diminishing resistance. 2 were already down, either wounded or surrendering, while the third, Morris, was engaged in a firefight with Forrester himself. Garrett seemed oblivious to his collapsing position, focused solely on Daniel with monomaniacal intensity. He moved forward, firing and reloading with practiced efficiency, forcing Daniel to remain behind his inadequate shelter. A bullet struck one of the barrels protecting Daniel, ricocheting with a whine that made Catherine flinch. She saw Daniel check his revolver empty, judging by his expression. He was out of ammunition and out of options. Garrett realized this too, a triumphant smile spreading across his face as he approached, weapon raised for the kill. "Any last words for your lady love, Redmond? She has a front row seat to your demise." Daniel's eyes met Catherine's across the distance, conveying a depth of emotion that transcended their dire circumstances. "I love you," he called to her, his voice clear and unafraid. "Remember that, whatever happens." "How touching," Garrett sneered, taking aim. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Garrett's finger tightened on the trigger, a figure burst from the shadows behind him, Liu, moving with surprising speed and grace for a man of his build. He tackled Garrett just as the revolver discharged, sending the bullet wide of its intended target. The two men grappled on the rocky ground, Liu fighting with desperate intensity, while Garrett, larger and stronger, struggled to bring his weapon to bear. Daniel immediately sprinted toward them, but distance made him seconds too slow. Garrett managed to wrench his arm free, the revolver swinging toward Liu's chest. The shot was deafening at such close range. Liu's body jerked once, then went still. "No." Catherine screamed, the sound torn from her throat. Daniel reached them in the next instant, driving into Garrett with such force that both men tumbled dangerously close to the cliff edge. The revolver skittered away across the rocky ground as they fought, fists and knees and elbows employed with brutal efficiency. Though wounded and exhausted, Daniel fought with the strength of righteous fury. He gained the upper hand, pinning Garrett against a boulder with his forearm pressed against the man's throat. "It's over, Garrett," he growled as police officers converged around them. Garrett, even in defeat, managed a blood-streaked smile. "Not quite," he gasped, and with his remaining strength he pulled a knife from his boot and slashed upward. Daniel jerked back, avoiding the worst of the blow but still taking a cut across his ribs. In the same motion, he delivered a powerful strike to Garrett's jaw that sent the man slumping unconscious to the ground. As officers secured Garrett, Daniel rushed to where Liu lay motionless. Catherine could see from his gentle movements and bowed head that their friend was beyond help. He closed Liu's eyes respectfully before finally turning toward Catherine, limping across the blood-streaked ground to where she remained bound. His hands shook slightly as he untied her, his face a mask of exhaustion and grief. When the ropes fell away, Catherine collapsed into his arms, her legs too weak to support her after the prolonged restraint and emotional ordeal. "I've got you," Daniel murmured, holding her tightly despite his own injuries. "It's over now. You're safe." Catherine buried her face against his chest, overwhelmed by the night's events, the terror, the loss, the miraculous intervention that had saved them both. "Liu," she whispered brokenly. "I know," Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "He followed you from the Lotus House, realized you were walking into a trap, came to find me at the safe house where I was fighting off Garrett's initial attack. Without him, I wouldn't have known where they'd taken you." James Forrester approached them, his expression somber. "We need to get you both medical attention," he said gently. "And there will be statements to make, formalities to observe." Daniel nodded wearily. "Garrett, alive, unfortunately, but he'll face the hangman's noose when all is said and done. We've been building a case against him and Harrison for months. This will be the final nail." As dawn broke over San Francisco Bay, painting the water with streaks of gold and rose, Catherine and Daniel were escorted back across the now exposed causeway, his arm around her waist providing both physical and emotional support. Behind them, officers carried Liu's body with dignity, while Garrett and his surviving men were led away in chains. The nightmare was over, but it had exacted a terrible price. As they reached the mainland, Catherine looked back at the abandoned cannery, now transformed by morning light from a place of terror to merely a derelict building on a rocky point. "We'll honor him properly," Daniel promised, understanding her thoughts. "Make sure his sacrifice is remembered." Catherine nodded, tears flowing freely. "He saved us both." "Yes," Daniel agreed solemnly. "And now we have to live lives worthy of that gift." Together they turned toward the city, toward healing, toward the future they had fought so hard to claim. In the weeks that followed, San Francisco gradually transformed from a place of danger to a place of possibility. Catherine's position at the school was secured despite her delayed arrival, the board impressed by her resilience and Daniel's evident devotion. Liu received a funeral befitting a hero, attended by the entire Chinese community as well as prominent citizens who had learned of his courageous actions. Catherine and Daniel established a scholarship in his name at the school, ensuring that children of Chinese immigrants would have educational opportunities regardless of their financial circumstances. Garrett's trial was swift and decisive, his crimes too numerous and well documented to dispute. When the judge pronounced the death sentence, Catherine felt not triumph but a somber relief that justice, true justice, had prevailed where vengeance had failed. Daniel, true to his word, found a position with the city police, his experience and integrity valued by a department struggling to maintain order in a rapidly growing metropolis. Though the work was sometimes dangerous, It allowed him to use his skills while remaining close to Catherine, a compromise that satisfied both his sense of duty and his desire for a more settled life. They were married on a clear autumn day, with James Forrester standing as Daniel's best man and Mrs. Lynn in attendance as Catherine's honored guest. The ceremony was small but joyful, a celebration of love that had emerged from circumstances neither could have imagined when they first met on that dusty street in Blackwater Gulch. As they exchanged vows, Catherine thought of how far they had come from a desperate rescue at the edge of a forsaken town to building a life together in one of America's most vibrant cities. Daniel had ridden in from the hills to claim her from evil men, but in truth, they had claimed each other, forging a bond that neither danger nor distance could sever. Their first home was a modest cottage near the school where Catherine taught, with a garden that bloomed magnificently under her care and a view of the bay from the upstairs windows. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the water with colors no artist could capture, and talk of their day, their dreams, their gradually healing wounds. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Daniel presented Catherine with a journal bound in soft leather, the first page inscribed with words that brought tears to her eyes. For Catherine, whose courage and love taught a solitary man how to live again. May these pages hold the story of our next chapter, written together. Their next chapter began sooner than expected, with the birth of their son the following spring, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. They named him Lawrence Liu Redmond, honoring both Daniel's lost love and the friend who had sacrificed everything for their happiness. As the 19th century drew toward its close, the Redmond family grew and prospered. Catherine eventually became headmistress of her school, implementing progressive educational philosophies that earned recognition throughout California. Daniel rose through the ranks of the police department, his integrity and fairness making him a respected figure in the community. They never forgot how their story began with danger, desperation, and an auction at the edge of a frontier town. But they understood that their love had transformed those dark beginnings into something beautiful and enduring, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the unexpected pathways that lead to happiness. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren in the garden of their San Francisco home, Daniel took Catherine's hand as they had done countless times before. His hair was silver now, her face lined with the wisdom of years, but the connection between them remained as powerful as it had been on that first journey across the wilderness. "You ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what might have happened if I hadn't ridden into Blackwater Gulch that day?" Catherine smiled, her eyes reflecting decades of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. "No," she replied simply, "because even if you hadn't, I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some souls are meant to journey together." Daniel nodded, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture unchanged by the passing years. "Then I am grateful that our paths converged when they did, my love. Every day with you has been a blessing I never thought to deserve." As twilight settled over their garden, painting the roses with golden light, Catherine leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that their story begun in desperation, but continued in love would echo in the lives of their children and their children's children, a legacy more enduring than any danger they had faced or triumph they had won. For in the end, it was not the rescue at the edge of town that defined them, but the life they had built together afterward, a life of purpose, integrity, and abiding love that transformed two solitary journeys into one shared adventure, richer and more meaningful than either could have traveled alone.